Welcome back to the Psychedelic Podcast by Third Wave. Today, I am speaking with Jay and Cory Fiset, the co-founders of the Connection Experience.
And so we, on that night, did MDMA together for the very first time, had this spectacular and amazing experience. We redid our vows. We recommitted to one another in terms of what we call our next 25 years or our next 10,000 days. And that began a 6-week cycle of us getting away from the world and intentionally using psychedelics to serve and support our connection, our healing, our evolution, and our presence. And that quite literally transformed us.
Welcome to the Psychedelic Podcast by Third Wave, audio mycelium connecting you to the luminaries and thought leaders of the psychedelic renaissance. We bring you illuminating conversations with scientists, therapists, entrepreneurs, coaches, doctors, and shamanic practitioners, exploring how we can best use psychedelic medicine to accelerate personal healing, peak performance, and collective transformation.
When the world feels crazy and chaotic, remember that you don't have to. You deserve to take control of your mental and physical health. And Cured Nutrition has arrived to make it easier for you to do exactly that. Formulated with their trinity of ingredients, a blend of full-spectrum cannabinoids, functional mushrooms, and adaptogens, Serenity Gummies are your answer to finding the calm in every storm. Cured wants you to feel good about feeling good. So they took their time formulating their Serenity Gummies. They left out the artificial flavors, sugars, and dyes, and replaced them with ingredients that actually help you thrive. I recently brought a whole bag of Cured Nutrition Serenity Gummies to the Third Wave team retreat in California. And let's just say that I didn't have anything left to bring home. They were a huge hit because they're perfect midday to ease stress and enhance creativity, probably due to the high dose of L-theanine that makes you extremely stress resilient, and it really helps me enhance my sleep while curbing any end-of-day cravings for that hint of sweetness. And the sleep benefit is likely due to the reishi mushrooms, the ashwagandha, and of course the CBD that they contain. Right now, Cured is extending an exclusive offer to our Psychedelic Podcast listeners. You can grab a bag of Serenity Gummies for 15% off by visiting curednutrition.com/thirdwave. That's Cured Nutrition, C-U-R-E-D nutrition.com/thirdwave. And use coupon code THIRDWAVE at checkout to save on your Serenity Gummies.
Hey listeners, I'm so excited to have Jay and Cory on the show today. Jay and Cory are partners. They're a husband and wife team that have been in a relationship for 37 years, and they reinvented both themselves and their relationship after 25 years of marriage through the intentional use of psychedelic medicine. They now offer intentional, safe, and intimate medicine experiences for those who are committed, couples who are committed to discover, express, and connect with themselves and each other. They are certified psychedelic guides focused on supporting couples, and their work draws upon 30 plus years of facilitating intense personal development programs, individual coaching, and leading experiential workshops and retreats for couples. I had the opportunity to meet Jay a couple months ago. We were introduced through a mutual friend, and it turns out that Jay has been on Third Wave's email list and had really loved our content, and we instantly hit it off. And when I heard a little bit more about what they were up to in Alberta and their own story of how MDMA had really helped to heal their relationship and how they were now creating very intentional containers for those in their community, I really wanted to get them on the podcast just so you all could hear a really, boots on the ground story to how couples are using MDMA to not only heal their marriages and their relationships, but also sharing that experience with others. And so we talked about their introduction to MDMA, their first MDMA experiences, when it finally really clicked, some of the challenges and friction that were present in their relationship, and how MDMA helped to heal those challenges. And overall, it was just a really heartwarming, beautiful story, as well as very informative in terms of how their story relates to your story or maybe a couple that you might know. Okay, without further ado, I bring you Jay and Cory Fiset. Hey listeners, welcome back to the Psychedelic Podcast. Today we have Jay and Cory Fiset joining us from Calgary, Alberta. Jay and Cory have a really special story, both as a couple and also now through the connection experiences that they are facilitating up in Calgary. And Jay and Cory, it's an honor to have you on. Thank you for joining us for the podcast.
Paul, we deeply appreciate it. So thanks so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you. Looking forward to this.
So the sort of standard template that I use when having a couple people on the show, and specifically now like a romantic couple, you've been together for many, 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 many years. I'd love if you could just tell our audience a little bit about your connection story. How did you meet? When did you meet? Why did you meet? And what have the past 30 plus years been like as a couple and being together?
I'm gonna let you start with that.
That's an easy one. I mean, how we met, we are high school sweethearts. So we met, and originally we met at, not to get into all the details, but at a high school dance, and caught each other's eye and started dating. I was in grade 10, Jay was in grade 11. So we were young. Like I was 17, I think 16, 17, 18 when we started dating. And so a long time ago, just kids. We didn't know any better about, like we were just finding our way in the world. And I don't know, too many details, but you'd had more relationships than I had. But I was very smitten with him. And so fast forward now, we've been married 27 years and together 10 prior to that. So we've had a long courtship and a lot of years together.
And we should clarify that even the 10 years prior to that, we spent about 5 years apart, meaning that we weren't like exclusively mutually dating. We had to sort of play the field a little bit and find out what else was out there. But we were always in relationship. Like, for example, I had a business that went bankrupt and I wanted to go back to school. I didn't have enough money. We weren't dating, but she loaned me the money to get back to college after a business failure. So like when I say we were in a relationship, we were still genuinely friends and with and for one another, even if we weren't dating.
Yeah, that's absolutely true.
Although I do want to tell one other story. Do you want to add to that?
No.
Which is the night of that dance, we ended up at a house party afterwards, and we were catching each other's eye, but neither of us was, let's say, bold enough to go and have a conversation. And I happened to be talking with a friend of mine. I can just see something coming through the air towards me, and as I look up, I get hit right here with a plastic shoe. And I look over, and she's wearing one shoe, and her best friend took the other shoe and threw it at me. So I just held on to the shoe all night long, knowing that she'd have to come talk to me before she went home. And that's how we had our first initial conversation, which was I wasn't getting her shoe back.
Sounds like very much like a high school dance thing that would happen, So one interesting element of your story is, high school sweethearts, you meet at the dance, Cory's friend throws a shoe at Jay, he holds on to it. And then over the next 10 years, you were sort of in and out of an intimate romantic relationship. And I'd love if you could just tell a little bit more about our listeners about how did you navigate that space? What was that like for you? Maybe what were some of the challenges and difficulties of that 10 years of navigating in and out of relationship?
Yeah, well, and to be clear, it wasn't really 10 years. And I can actually put some time frame around this that might help. So I started a business, moved away 1986. We had dated all of 85, all of 86. And then we were apart in that time frame from there until about 1991. So it was really about 5 years of where we were doing that dance back and forth. And I really think that the key for me is that we became genuine friends, that we cared about one another. Like she was sick and seeing other people, but I'm the one who's taking her to the hospital. I had a business that blew up and I went back to college to take business admin. I didn't have 2 nickels to rub together. She loaned me the money to go back to school. Like we were always still there for one another in both the good and the bad times. And I think and I'll speak for my part, is that it was never a question of did we care about one another? It was a question of were we mature enough, smart enough, evolved enough to actually make a relationship work. And in that context, we were teenage kids raising each other, growing up with one another, and we made a ton of mistakes. And at the end of the day, still loved each other and cared about each other, and therefore ended up together. Does that make more sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. Cory, do you want to add to that?
Just that when we've had conversations about that time, we've talked about an invisible thread or cable or something that just kept bringing us back together. And the other side of that through the last few years too is recognizing for ourselves and for a lot of couples we've worked with is there's also like core wounds that you have that bring you together. It's the side that people don't really like to talk about, the love and the sexual attraction. And there was, the fun and the being kids and partying and, just spending all this great time together, getting to know each other. But there's also other reasons that, we always end up together or in each other's orbit. So there's been some like healing and conversation around that as well.
Far greater understanding today than ever in our life. And in large part due to our work and participation with psychedelics that allowed us to see our history and patterns from different perspectives.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about those. Like what was brought into your awareness after doing really intentional psychedelic work as a couple? What was that shift like for your relationship? Sort of a, Jay and Cory before and Jay and Cory after this intentional work.
Is this an 18-hour podcast, Paul?
Yeah, exactly. Look, you could just go, Maybe like the 7-minute version. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Here's what happened for us. Basically, business, children, burying a couple of parents, some depression, some stuff going on, that we end up in a position of really parallel lives. And we should put it in context here is that we facilitated personal development programs for years. We led couples retreats and programs for years. And that actually caused us some harm because this conversation is like, Jesus, Murphy, if the two of us can't figure this the hell out, what the hell, come on, we can do this, which caused us to not go get the support that we actually needed and the external perspective that we needed. Mm-hmm. So we're falling into these parallel lives. We keep doing things to try and make it better. And we would get, 3 months or 6 months of sort of, we're in the groove. And then we would fall out for another 12 or 18 months of, I'm going to call it parallel lives and coping. And so this went on for about 10 years after our second child came home.
And it wasn't terrible. Like, it's not like we fought and it wasn't like we were, on the verge of divorce. It was just like, the best way to explain it is just that parallel lives. Like, we're parents and we're running a business and I'm doing all the stuff with the kids and he's traveling and, making money. And we're just keeping on. And before you realize it even, or you start to realize, wait a minute, this is more like he's my best friend. He's, he's like my brother. He's like my, and then we started to lose the
spark, the passion,
spark.
care,
the polarity is a word that I often hear a lot in that.
Yeah. And I think, the phrase that echoes when we're talking about this is like, it's like good or okay is the enemy of great. No one was unfaithful. No, there wasn't most of the relationship drama that we are aware of that lots of people face. It just got so parallel that it became unbearable. So we keep trying. It keeps getting meh. And I had been asked in one of our several, let's clean this up, to do MDMA about before this. So it'd be 8 years ago. And for context.
By yourself?
No, actually, the first introduction was with a coach I was working with, and I was describing where we were at, and he's like, "You and your wife still love each other." It's like, totally. And you and your wife still want to sleep together. It's like, totally. And it's like, I'm sending you MDMA, and you're going to do it, and it's going to fix everything. And I'm like,
no.
and I mean that in all seriousness because, and I think you and I talked about this. Is like in my history, like in high school, I sold weed and hash oil and all that stuff. But I always had this very hard line about I would never do a chemical. By the way, Cory's in the same boat. Not that she sold stuff, but she would never do a chemical. And it was just, I couldn't bring myself to do something that I thought some dingbat was mixing up in a bathtub in his house, right? Like I couldn't get over that hurdle. So literally 8 years ago, it's like, you must try this. We have a 13-second dismissive conversation about it, and it's like, hell no. A couple of years later.
And like, how could that make any, I mean, I didn't even know exactly what it was, but I'm like, just no. And how could that help? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Take drugs. What? That's no, just no. That was it. End of conversation. And we carried on. And all happy and stuff.
Right, yeah. If only, right? If only then.
All happy and totally self-righteous about it. It's like, stupid.
We know better.
So then a couple of years later, we're at a thing called Mastermind Talks, run by Jason Gaynard, and Dan Ingle is speaking there. And I am really inspired by this. And actually, Cory, that was one of the trips that she'd actually come with me. So she was actually up in the room while I'm listening to this, and I'm like, how do we do that? How like I was really quite inspired by it. We have another, I don't know, maybe 30-second dismissive conversation about it, and it gets shelved. So I guess I just want to add to this in the story. So any of you who might be listening to this, who are dismissive and uncertain, all those sorts of things, for the love of all things good in the world, just find a way to experience it safely and then decide. We were completely talking out of our you-know-what because we didn't know what we didn't know. Anyway, so fast forward another 2 years. I'm actually at a racing school with a gentleman who is a fighter pilot for the U.S. Navy and suffering from PTSD and a whole variety of things. And he talks to me about a woman therapist in Vancouver who he found, and he'd been doing MDMA assisted therapy with her. And in his words, it saved my life.
Wow.
And I come back and I take it as far as I have her name, I have her number. He's authorized me to talk to her because it has to have the secret handshake and all of the things that are sometimes required there. And I talk to Cory about it, and we don't do it. Still.
So what made the difference? What is it that finally got you over the
I'm
hump?
doing an event in San Diego. A dear friend of mine and a client of mine says, hey, I've been doing these MDMA journey things for now maybe 4 or 5 years, and do you want to try it? And at that stage of the game, I'm just at my wit's end about us. It's like, I don't know what else to do, and I've done everything I know how to do, and I think I'm done. Like
And just prior to that happening, though, I had come back to work with you.
Yeah.
So like things were starting to just kind of take this trajectory.
A turn for the better for the first time in about a decade.
Yeah. And I was at this event with Jay, and then I left early because there were 2 back-to-back events. I left after the first one to get back home to the kids. And then this happens at the end of the second one where he is given this opportunity to have this experience.
But here's the thing, Paul, and I feel embarrassed to tell the part of the story I'm about to tell because I have no context of what this is. So he tells me about this, and I say, okay, like, I mean, whatever. We just worked 14 days. Me and my team have been exhausted. And it's like, in my head, I thought, we're ending the event. We're going to go back to the suite. It'll be a little bit like smoking a little weed with my key clients and my team that's worked so hard. And we're going to enjoy one another's company, watch the sun go down, and just have a little. And of course, that's not exactly what happened.
So the poor guy, I wasn't there, like I said, but Jay explaining it, he's like, he kept saying, getting everyone's intention and being really clear before taking the medicine. And he's just like, listen, dude, like, just give us the stuff.
Give us the drugs. Come on.
At one
Not
point,
understanding, right?
At one point, Paul, I uttered these words, which again, I'm embarrassed to say, but just in complete transparency with people who might be struggling with this, I want you to understand that. So I finally say to him, it's like, listen, will you please shut the F up and give us the drugs, because the sun is going down and I don't want to miss it. And you're effing this up. Like, come on. And he's like, that's not how this goes. And I'm like, well, I think it is tonight.
After hundreds of conversations with our listeners, we found that the single biggest problem when most people begin to explore the world of psychedelics is sourcing the medicine. So we've developed a creative solution, Third Wave's Mushroom Grow Kit and video course. Just go to thethirdwave.co/mushroom-grow-kit and use the code 3WPodcast to get a $75 discount. I've experimented with a lot of different grow kits in the past, and this one is seriously next level. We've partnered with super nerd mycologists to make this the simplest, easiest grow kit possible. It's small enough to fit in a drawer, and most people get their first harvest in 4 to 6 weeks. You get everything you need right out of the box, pre-sterilized and ready to use, except for spores, which we can't sell for legal reasons. And speaking of legal issues, growing your own mushrooms for quote-unquote scientific purposes is 100% legal in 47 states. You can have your private supply of medicine without the risk. Our course also comes with a step-by-step high-quality video program showing you exactly what to do when you receive that mushroom grow kit. No blurry photos or vague language. You'll see exactly what to do each step of the way. Yields range from 28 to 108 grams, so this more than pays for itself in one harvest. Plus, you can get up to 4 harvests per kit. This is the simplest way to get a reliable supply of your own psilocybin mushrooms. Again, just go to thethirdwave.co/mushroom-grow-kit and use the code 3WPodcast to save $75. The number 3, the letter W, podcast to save $75.
And so ultimately, he shortened his little presentation. We did this, and I proceeded to have one of the top 3 or 4 most meaningful experiences of my entire life, which in a nutshell was this spotlight shone down on me. And without blame of me, without blame of Cory, I saw where I was at and the role that I had played in building a brick wall between us. And literally, I saw this brick wall between us, and every single brick had a little story or an excuse or a justification on it that I'd been building that was about denying what I wanted and needed and where I was at, and was getting in the way of us actually having connection. And in an instant of what I would call like lightning bolt clarity, it was like, this isn't about her, this is about me. And I'm going to lose weight, I'm going to fix my teeth, I'm going to grow my hair, and I'm going to get my needs met and fulfilled no matter what. And it was a degree of certainty that I have only ever experienced one other time in my life. And there was no, I have to work at it. It was just like, it was already done and underway. And the irony to that is I did that journey weighing 203 pounds, the most I'd ever weighed in my entire life. Oh. And when I got home the next night, the day after, I'd lost 10 pounds, which I think was just the 10 pounds of the weight, of the lie, of the deceit, of the justification that I let go of in that moment of truth. And so I came home and I said, listen, I love you. I've been trying to get you to do things so that we could be okay. And I'm not doing that anymore. This is what I'm doing. I love you. And I want you to come along. And if you can't, that's okay too. And I understand. And that was the hinge upon which our entire universe changed. Mm-hmm. She was super happy about hearing all that, by the way. That was a great conversation.
Yeah. What were your impressions of Jay coming back? Like what shifts did you notice? What did that feel like for you, Cory?
And just to add, he has since apologized to the fellow that night about how upfront she was about all that.
Many times.
She's like, I'm so sorry, dude. I did not understand what this was going to be like this, but anyway.
I feel like a complete dumbass about that, to be honest.
Well, it was difficult. Like, he came home and he didn't tell me right away. Like, he didn't get off the plane and go, guess what I did last night? There wasn't a conversation about it. And because he knew, you knew I would, number one, that you would do that without even saying anything to me or including me, or why didn't you tell me? Like, there would be all so he kind of eased into this conversation about MDMA. And I think we watched one of those Goop shows together. At the time, she had one out about that. Mm-hmm. That just happened to be out at the same time. He's like, watch it. And again, opened the conversation about, would I be open to trying this? And then shared so we had the talk. Like, it was a difficult time, really difficult time, because, that conversation, what he just shared with you about everything that had to change for him. And the one thing I think that saved us at that point is that we both loved each other. Mm-hmm. We had the love there. I think if for either one of us, if the love wasn't there, I'm not sure for me that I would have said, yes, I'm on board with you. And how do we make this work? Like, what do we do? And for you as well, it just wouldn't have happened. So and
we had this incredible blessing as well, which I say this trepidatiously because I know it wasn't everyone's experience, was that that occurred basically the beginning of March 2020. And 8 days later, the entire world shut down. And I used to be gone 2 weeks out of the month. Yeah. And the world shut down, and here we are in this spot. And we thought, great, we're going to have like 3 to 6 weeks to talk.
Turns out we had 2 years to talk.
Yeah. Especially in Canada.
But I'll just add one other thing that I think is important. And this part of the story seemed to be taking a long time. So just to get
this is beautiful.
But what really happened that was beautiful about COVID, and with the use of, because I wanted her to do MDMA right away, but we couldn't find a safe source there. It took us 6 months to find a safe source. So we did start experimenting with mushrooms, and psilocybin actually helped us an inordinate amount in the early stages of reframing these conversations. But here's the key thing that I think transpired, was that this love that Cory's talking about that we had, is that we just got incredibly curious. Like, and it wasn't, and we weren't even sure we were going to make it at this stage. And it wasn't like, okay, we're fixing it, it's all going to be well. Like
we made the agreement to dive into conversation. We had to talk and we had to communicate, and we had not been. We both were feeling how we were feeling, and we were avoiding it, and we were,
we trigger each other as soon as we tried to talk.
Yes, we would try to have a conversation. It would be like, it would be tough. It'd be difficult. It'd be, we just couldn't do it. And so we'd end up both, arguing, and we decided we had to have the conversation, and we had to talk about how we got here. And we got curious about how did we end up here? We love each other. Like, how did this happen? So that's how it started, was those conversations. And again, at that point, not even knowing that we're going to make it. But we didn't have that at the very beginning. And that's where I think the psilocybin mushroom journeys that we did really helped, because it allowed us to engage at a different level.
Well, in fact, you nicknamed it early on truth serum.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm not sure. In fact, there were a couple of times, like, I'm not sure I want to have that conversation, but it's like, okay, the truth serum's kicking in. Here we go. And literally, so we just had these literally thousands of hours of conversation that really,
and difficult conversations, like stuff that we had to get on the table and talk about and resolve, or come to an agreement about, or,
same gonna be.
Yeah.
And I think the key piece to that there was this freedom in, we're not sure it's going to work, and we're not going anywhere, and we're going to get curious and find out how the hell we got here, because how do two human beings who have some skills, who have a little bit of money, who have a ton of support, who have love for each other, who are still sexually attracted to you, how the hell do we land in this spot? Like, seriously, how? And that was magical. Anyway, 6 months later, I finally get MDMA for her. Or you had a question, go ahead.
Well, I would say, like, what did you find was the answer to that question? Like, how did you end up in that spot?
Good question, Paul.
You take a run first, or do you want me to?
One of my things that I had to get really accountable. What can easily happen in this kind of a situation is, well, if you this or you that, or if you wouldn't have done this 10 years ago, and if blah blah blah.
Blame.
We dived into our own accountability in this and how we got here. And a big part of mine was taking him for granted. And in that, and that sounds like simple, because, that happens all the time. But it when it goes on and on and on and on, and then kids come and all that. And then Jace asked me a question, like right at the beginning of this. He said, where am I on your priority list? Like, where in your day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month, where am I? And I had trouble answering that. I had trouble telling, like, he wasn't.
Can I actually put more detail to that? What I said was, I'm not on it. And she's like, yes, you are.
Well, of course you are.
And I'm like, well, then you place it. In all of the things you deal with, where am I? And she couldn't get me on the list.
And so that, for me, it was like taking him for granted, not putting our relationship as a priority, because there were a million other things that were. I had to face that and acknowledge that. And, am I willing to change that? Am I willing to do the work to shift that? And so really it was taking accountability and just checking into self about what is my role in what's the role I've played in how we ended up here in this spot? And that, I mean, you have to get honest about that. Otherwise the relationship is not going to shift.
And just the other side to that, which I didn't see at the time. This was actually after many journeys, after getting our guide certification, after a bunch of personal things, because most of our journeys we did together. But I think the thing, going back to the traumas we referred to earlier, is that I've been fundamentally independent since I've been 12 years old. And, my mom and I, there's a story that I used to tell with great pride about my independence and how I've made my own way and all the rest of it. And it wasn't until doing a bunch of this work where I looked at it like, Jesus Christ, that is my core trauma. I am on my own. I'm independent. I take care of people. People don't take care of me. And then I proceeded to manifest that in my marriage until I couldn't take care of anyone else anymore. And I was crushed and broken. So that was my part of it, which is, hey, I can play that role. That's what I do. That's what I've done since I was 12 years old.
And he did it very well. And I would even find myself thinking like, Jay will always be there. Like he will always be there, until, Jay
the
might
taking
not
for granted.
always be there. Right. So
the taking for granted part. Right.
Yeah.
So that to me, I think is one of the core things. I was going to answer it differently, hon. I was going to say that there were so many subtleties, like it's almost like death by 1,000 cuts. And those subtleties in presence, those subtleties in sexuality, those subtleties in honesty, those subtleties in participation with family. I don't know if you have in-laws, but sometimes that can be a little entertaining. Like there's all of those dynamics that that we fell into a very difficult spot with. And and I'll just share my version of that is that the 10 years prior to my first psychedelic experience, our second son came home, her dad passed away, and she fell into a depression. And it was undiagnosed, and she never would go to get it looked at or taken care of until, many years later. But that first 3 years of that, I felt honored to serve and support the woman I love who's having a tough time given the circumstances we're in. It's okay. The next 3 years, taxing and difficult. It was like, that was where it's like, I need change, and I need change now because I can't keep doing this. Then the last 3 years were just epically god awful, which led to, my guide trying to lead a journey, and I'm like, be quiet and give me the drugs.
Just need them. I need the medicine.
Yeah, but at the time,
sun's coming down.
And that was how ignorant I was, Paul. I didn't get that it was medicine. Right? Like I didn't get that. I thought that this was just going to be some altered state that will help me cope with the difficulties of my life and working like a madman. Like I didn't get that it was medicine. And that's probably the loudest thing about, be quiet and give it to me. Right.
Right. Right. So MDMA comes on the scene. COVID hits, right? Jake, you got home a few days before COVID and you had shared a little bit about your own experience. Tell us a little bit then about how did you set up that first experience together? Did you bring in a therapist? Did you just do it you two? Like kind of bring us into that story now and what starts to shift as a result of working intentionally with MDMA.
And when you're saying her first experience with MDMA?
Well, I would love to hear about that, but also then, you're both like together when that. Well,
happened, like he said, it was till June of 2020 where we were able to find secure for me and not to spend too much time on mine, but I was really nervous about it. The night before, I was like, I'm not sure I want to do this. And anyway, long story short, I went ahead and with a therapist, yes, with the same fellow who guided Jay and his
so we listened slightly better this time.
Yeah.
So, but we had to do it over Zoom because we thought we could go to him or he could come to us, but because of COVID, that didn't happen. So he ended up, he was like you sitting there looking at me and we had a conversation and we had a conversation while we were in the process. And he told Jay to give me like kind of a tolerance test amount, just a small amount. We went to a hotel because our kids are here. We had Auntie with her kids and it was all good, but we, don't bring any more, just give her this and that's it. And we're just going to see how she is. And we're going to have a conversation and all that was fine. And I I remember, kind of dropping in and just feeling this overwhelming. Keep in mind, first time ever I've ever tried this ever. And I always remind myself of this experience when people come to us and it's their first time. And I just remember, because now we've been 3 years, doing a lot, and I've kind of forgotten that very first experience of heart opening with MDMA. And it was spectacular. I was just lying there on this bed with, our guy on the Zoom sitting on the ironing board. The computer was on the ironing board. Anyway, and I'm just like, oh my God. I just loved everything. I loved the bed. I loved the ironing board. I loved him. I loved you. I went through that just beautiful, beautiful experience. And then it didn't last that long because it was a smaller amount. After maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours, I started to feel it leaving. And I was just like, no, I don't want this to end. I don't want this feeling of myself to end. And how I've described it for me is it has given me the opportunity through various times of just really connecting with my true self. Yes. And just really dropping into who I am and seeing the world from that space and communicating from that space and connecting with that part of me that I have never done before. I thought I had, but I hadn't. So often we get questions like, do you lose control? And, because that's a big concern people have about losing agency. And I'm like,
especially entrepreneurs who are type A and then, very linear for most of their lives.
Right.
For sure. Yeah.
For me, it was the opposite. It was about coming more into myself and being more grounded in myself. So that was my first experience, which was beautiful.
I'd love to share a reflection on that, Cory. Please. Just one brief one. When MDMA first came on the scene in the late 70s, there was a guy named Leo Zeff, who was, the core guy who started to get it out into the world. And he nicknamed MDMA Adam because he said that MDMA brought you back into this sort of the Garden of Eden in a way, this sort of innocence and pure love that we know we are, but that for whatever reason, because of our traumas, because of our conditioning, because of just everything that's going on, we feel blocked from. And so when I hear you talk about that state, that feeling, I feel like there's resonance. It's like, oh, you can really experience that true self that's not encumbered by all of the stresses and, particularities of life. And it can just be fully in the heart center, loved, present, content, all those things.
Absolutely.
I'd never heard the Adam story. Thank you for sharing that. But that is, that's a powerful metaphor in my mind of what occurs. Mm-hmm. So we do that. And then we decide that we're going to have our first MDMA together on our 25th wedding anniversary in August. And just to be clear, all throughout this time, we weren't sure we were going to make 25 years. We just weren't sure. And so we, on that night, did MDMA together for the very first time, had this spectacular and amazing experience. We redid our vows. We recommitted to one another in terms of what we call our next 25 years or our next 10,000 days. And that began a 6-week cycle of us getting away from the world and intentionally using psychedelics to serve and support our connection, our healing, our evolution, and our presence. And that quite literally transformed us. And in about that time frame, we lost 60 pounds. Our sexual connection went through the absolute roof. Our joy and passion and connection was crazy. And literally, Paul, this is the crazy thing. We live on a cul-de-sac with a dog park in Calgary. And literally, not long after this, people taking their dog to the park came to our front step and knocked on the door. And it's like, we've been watching you guys. We don't know what you're doing, but can you help us? And we're like, no, we're just trying to figure our shit out ourselves. Thank you very much. We just narrowly escaped our 25th divorce, right? We can't help. But a couple of years later, that brought us to, if we're going to do this, we need to educate ourselves. We did our guide certification with an organization I know you're familiar with. We absolutely love. We started beta testing the connection experience in October, and the experiences have been, I don't know how to say this, but it's like in sort of the romantic version, it's like what happened for us was magical and unique and all the rest of it. It's like in the context of the work that we're doing with couples, it's like that's sort of what you can expect, just like reinvent yourself, reinvent your relationship, reinvent everything. And I know that sounds crazy to say, but it is the consistent testimonials that we get from folks about, thank God I have my wife back. It's been 10 years and she's home. Like just things that literally make us cry, like
it's been amazing.
And I want to get into this, but before we get into specifically the connection experience, I think even a little bit more backstory on, and you alluded to this already a little bit, but we heard about your personal story, high school sweethearts, some of the challenges that came up in relationship, how MDMA helped with that. But you two have also been two badass entrepreneurs. You've built multiple businesses. You've been very successful in many regards. And I'd love if you could just bring us a little bit into that story. What were Jay and Cory building prior to MDMA? And then I'd love if you could just talk a little bit about how your own healing through MDMA has actually started to shift and impact the way you do business and the way you think about business and what you actually think is important from an entrepreneurial perspective.
Wow, that's a lot of questions, brother.
We got time. I know you love to talk, Jay, so I sense it'll just sort of flow.
I'll let you answer that, driving the bus and the whole entrepreneur
so to be clear, one of the challenges between us in our relationship was my entrepreneurial drive and my propensity to risk the farm. And Cory comes from you work 50 years for a gold watch because you make goddamn sure that you can pay the mortgage and everybody's okay. And that's how that goes. So that was a dynamic that was, I think, both worked for us and was challenging over the years. So I'll answer the entrepreneurial stuff and then she can correct it from the perspective of what it's like living with a crazy person. So about this time, and sort of, actually, I should probably give a chapter there. So we spent almost 30 years in a personal development company called Personal Best Seminars here in Calgary. It arguably became one of the largest personal development companies in Canada, and something like 40,000 people went through those doors over the years. So going back to your question of how did we also navigate, is that we grew up in this environment of attempting to be more conscious, which didn't always work quite clearly, of attempting to be more conscious, attempting to be accountable in terms of our process, serving and supporting literally tens of thousands of people, which had strength to it, but also caused us this difficulty of, hey, if we can't figure out who the hell can.
Well, right? And because we also facilitated couples weekends, retreats, we've worked with hundreds of couples over the years in,
lots of different ways. Yeah. So
how to heal your relationships.
So we basically, I bought that out of bankruptcy. We grew that to be a strong 7-figure business. That was all well and fine. I got to the spot where I was like kind of done with this personal development world. I wanted to do something, more high level. So we did a bunch of high level masterminds. That was a good, nice, strong 7-figure business. And then through a weird turn of events, when I decided I didn't want to do as much in-person work, I wanted to do digital marketing, because those were the days where you could send an email and make $17 million. The
Wild West, the early days of the good days.
With this email that said, "Hey, stay at home, drink coffee, wear your pink fuzzy slippers, and make millions." And I'm like, and for context, like that year, we had done 287 live events in 4 different cities. Yes. So just for context, it's like staying at home, sending an email. That sounded really pleasurable. And of course, I dove into that and I failed miserably because getting support, not one of my strongest suits. 3 years later, after burning through a bunch of cash, I end up on this. Somebody asked me about running masterminds, which is something that my core business did. And I said, I have this whole training program. I'll just give it to you. And that went from 0 to, I think we did $2.6 million US in 14 months, accidentally, out of just taking this internal training program and sharing it with people, which was totally fantastic. And then in that whole digital marketing world, I became sort of a little bit like a rising star. It's like, how'd you do that? And the answer to that question was joint ventures. It's like, can you teach me? It's like, no, it's not what we do. It's like, are you sure? Would you please? And then that actually gave birth to this thing called the Joint Venture Summit, which is what you and I are talking about, way back in 2015.
Wow.
And then that gave birth to another brand called JVology, the perfect mix of people, fun, and profit. So anyway, that's a bunch of context to say personal development, masterminds, both running them and teaching people how to position, launch, and lead them. That led to this joint venture umbrella. And that sounds like I'm a little bit schizophrenic, which may or may not be true. But the golden thread between all of those organizations is that we serve and support people to create conscious communities of choice. And whether that's in a mastermind group, whether that's in a personal development, choice and family, whether that's in your joint venture community group, all of those pieces. And then that also carries forward into our new world, which is this thing called Connected Now and Forever, which is to create couples communities that are conscious communities of choice. And it starts right here with the love of my life, and then other committed couples who are doing the same kind of work. So the thread's the same, the mechanic changes, but I'd say my sort of stupid human trick is anything that I really love and I'm passionate about, I can make a 7-figure business out of in about 4 months.
I want that skill. Sounds phenomenal. Fix all
she
my
might
problems.
warn you otherwise.
So what's the shadow side of that, Cory? Tell us what's been your experience? Because I was raised in a similar environment as you. My mom's a social worker. My dad worked at a university, super frugal, Midwest, dollar allowance. And so becoming an entrepreneur in the last 10 years, I've had to learn a lot about stepping out of that story and releasing it. I'm not quite as much of a maverick as Jay in terms of, betting the farm, but I did, choose to build an entrepreneurial career around psychedelics, which is a whole nother,
that's a fair risky maneuver, man.
Yeah. My 25-year-old self didn't really think anything of it. It was like, whatever. No, I'm like, yeah. So what was it like for you, Cory, just being with Jay during all that time and supporting him or not supporting him, or kind of how were you involved with that?
It certainly, it challenges the whole security value system, and there's that side, but then there's also the side, which is the reality of running your own business. There's the ups, there's the downs, there's the peaks and the valleys of especially running live events and the flow of income. And, and so like when you get a 9-to-5 job and you're paid every second Friday and you're paid this amount, you can plan, you can prepare, you can budget, you can do all that. In this world, it's like, okay,
we're billionaires. We're broke. We're billionaires. We're broke.
And that would stress me out, like really stress me out. So I had to, figure that out. And then there was the fact of him traveling a lot. So there was a price on the other side of it of being away a lot. Like he was away. I don't know. You figured it out.
I think it was between 10 and 14 days a month for almost 8 years.
Yeah. And so that was the period where we started falling into this, the parallel lives thing as well. And I started to feel like a single parent. He was there for some of the like hockey games and school things, and a lot he wasn't. And then, and raising 2 boys. And then, he would come home and he'd be like, work so hard all week and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, me too, like do you see the value in what I'm doing and holding down the fort here and taking care of and everything. And it felt, and it was my own stuff. It felt like I wasn't being valued for everything I was doing. And he didn't feel like he was being acknowledged and valued for everything he was carrying. And so we were both kind of all, in that little like indignant, well, I'm doing all this. Well, I'm doing all this. And
can I say it another way?
We fell into some issues with that.
We fell into a lot of issues. And this goes back to the MDMA experience that to be witnessed and heard in the state of true self is one of the most healing aspects of everything that we do. And what was just described there is the reality of the day to day, which is we were not in our true selves, working as hard as we possibly freaking could, and still remained unseen.
Yeah. And so it's like there's sacrifice, there's toil, I'm taking so much of this on, I'm doing all, and you both feel that way. So then there's resentment that builds up from that. And so, and what I heard in this MDMA story is like, once we let go of the resentment, and I think once we let go of the blame in relationship and we take full ownership and accountability over our sovereign experience of life, then that allows for like almost a rebirth of, we can be 2 self-realized individuals coming together rather than 2 codependent people who are constantly projecting and blaming one another for the challenges or difficulties, right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So I'd love if you could just bring our listeners into the container and structure that you are now creating for couples with MDMA. What is that process like? You've started to do this already. What are you noticing? What type of healings are happening? How is it shifting relationships? Bring us a little bit into the work now that you're actually facilitating.
So the core of your question in terms of what we're doing now and why actually goes back to a really important thing I wanted to share. So our 25th, we have this incredible experience that is like, how on earth? Like it was like best of our lives together. And then 6 weeks later, we have another, what we've come to call adventure plan. And like a few days earlier, she's like, oh my God, like, I'm like totally stressed out about this. I'm worried about this. Like, how could we ever have anything anywhere? Like, we'll never touch that again. And it's like, just relax. Like, we're just going to go be with each other. Anyway, I'd say for like 6 months, every single time we'd have an adventure plan, you were worried that it was going to be some letdown experience and that it wouldn't have.
Because the last one was just so amazing and life-changing.
Yes.
So they were all that way, but.
So anyway, we began a protocol to prepare for what our adventures were going to be like. And that protocol was just designed first and foremost for us to be in the right head and heart space, for her to not have anxiety about meeting or beating the last one. And that really just started with this 5 days before. What is the intention that we want to experience? What do we want to give? What do we want to receive? What do we want to share? And we would start talking about that, so day 5, day 4, day 3, then we would abstain from any sort of intimacy or sexual connection, but we would be still flirting and playing and texting and all those sorts of things leading up to the actual day. So we built this ramp up to our adventure nights. And then we sort of like almost naturally came into this follow-up integration because, our belief is it's well and fine to have these beautiful experiences, but it has to change the fabric, the experience day-to-day, moment-to-moment in our homes, in our bedrooms, in our hearts, in our relationship with our kids, with our families. So we ended up in these integration conversations of, so what was most meaningful in that particular experience? How do we integrate that day-to-day between the experiences? How do we support one another to, one of the things that we got to was we started working out together again. And that might not seem like much, but working out together was an incredibly powerful embodiment and somatic experience of integrating and aligning those experiences. So we had our bedroom, that used to be a bedroom, turned into our sanctuary that has a massage table and all those sorts of things. We have a big tub where we would go and plan to have meaningful conversations about particular topics in the tub. And we nicknamed them Tub Talks with Jay. So there was just a whole bunch of very practical, tactical integration pieces that we then designed a similar experience for our couples and for our clients to follow the 5 days after.
The other thing we noticed in between our adventures and the subtleties of the shifts between us, our engagement with one another, how we communicated with each other, how we acknowledged each other, how we, we, as we've said, been together 35 plus years and just, pass each other in the kitchen and give each other a little kiss, or how we engage with one another just day to day and parenting the kids and how we were speaking to each other. It all changed without trying to change it. Like, that's the amazing thing. It's like these 3 things got to change and this is what we're going to do. It just through the neurogenesis, through the rewiring, through whatever was going on in those times together that we set aside, we became different people, and how we interacted became different. It just happened. And that's one of the things that's hard to describe to people. Like, what do you mean? How does that? You just have to do it. You just have to have the experience to know what it is I'm talking about, because it happened without us even realizing it was happening. And there's not a step-by-step A, B, C, D, E, F, G thing we can give to people and say, here, this is how you do this. It was fascinating. It was beautiful. It was, that just became our day-to-day experience in between our adventures.
And if I can just add real quick, that thing I was talking about is being seen and witnessed in the state of true self. Mm-hmm. Naturally became seeing and witnessing the true selves in one another while we were not on journey.
Yeah.
Like that just carried forward. In fact, we're one of the best things, we get testimonials from people, like they just send us like what happened, right? So this dear friend of ours, they've had a consistent rub in their relationship, and she has a tendency to withhold, which was something that we experienced until it came out. And so she decided, I'm not going to withhold. When I feel it, I'm going to articulate it, which would normally be the start of the fight. So she feels it. She says, hey, can we talk about this? They talk about it. And his response, which is usually defensiveness and resistance and all sorts of things, was, I hear you. How can I help?
Mm-hmm.
And like, she just sent this note. She said, like, we've been together like for decades, and those words have never passed through his lips, like, ever, particularly not in a circumstance of conflict. I see you. How can I help? Like, that's what shifts. It's beautiful.
And that's how we came up with the name, a connection experience, because if we were to summarize or encapsulate what was going on with us, it was about our connection. Yeah. And somebody also said, we've been to therapy for years to try to
solve the problem so we can get connected.
And in this experience, we were able to get connected first, and then we could have the conversations. Like, it was turned around. It was opposite. That's the word we came up with to best describe what was happening for us.
And ideally, there's that connection then, and what the medicine often teaches, this has been my experience, whether it's MDMA or other medicines, is the more we can get out of a fix-it mindset, the better, because the fix-it mindset then is something that it's sort of a mode of reactivity. And it keeps us stuck in a circumstance where we feel like we don't have agency and accountability. And when we're like you said, when we step into this true self, we're two adults. Well, there's going to be challenges. There will be obstacles. But if we're always here and communicating and have that commitment to one another, then there's nothing that needs to be fixed. Instead, it's just like there's things that need to be talked about and communicated around, right?
I wrote an article which was reinvent versus repair. And that whole idea that we could actually just reinvent ourselves, which frankly, we didn't know. Like this became a reinvention that we didn't know that was possible because we'd spent years trying to repair. And I totally 100% agree with your grounding.
And it's the default state for most people that we've been conditioned into, right? To fix, to repair, to, solve. But I think thinking about it from a much more sort of a lens of ingenuity or a lens of innovation is much more revitalizing for relationships. Right?
Yeah, without a doubt.
Most definitely. And it allows for the longevity of that. It's not just a little quick fix for, a couple months will be better, and then that's it. It carries on and on and on. Like, it feels like the most, I don't want to use the word permanent, but long-term, if both people are willing to be really present and engage in it, that their relationship can absolutely shift long-term. And the integration is a huge part of that. But it's the only thing we have found in our entire life together that has allowed for this kind of reinvention, connection, staying married. Like, it's the only thing.
Depth of transformation and and term of transformation. If you think of a depth and term, nothing. And just to be clear about this, we've been in the personal development space for over 35 years. So you
it's
name
not like
it,
you haven't tried other tricks and other modalities, right?
And people say to me, "You ever heard of the Enneagram?" Yeah, I did it 22 years ago.
Yeah,
it's pretty fantastic. Like it's like that litany and that list was incredibly long, short of any.
Have you ever gone in a dyad and talked about how you feel? yeah, we have. But anyway, and not to downplay what people do and where they're at, because there's a million things that can work. But I'm trying to think of the key thing too, is the amygdala being offline and really being able to share without that fear and ego and how's he going to take this, and that's just gone. And I say to people, can you imagine just having the tough, edgy conversation with that not active?
From the space of compassion for self and your partner.
Exactly. Because then you have way more room and spaciousness to hold whatever. And in an interesting way, none of it is taken personal.
Mm-hmm.
And all of it, there's always, I find, accountability. It's like, I don't take this personal. It is what needs to be spoken. And if there's accountability that I need to take for certain actions or ways that I'm behaving, I will take that accountability because it's what is going to be best for our relationship.
Absolutely.
It is spectacular in that manner. I think the only other thing that I really wanted to share about it was this idea that, as terrified as we were, that there's some symmetry to, if somebody's thinking, I wonder if we should do that as a couple, or like, I wonder if that could really make a difference, or sort of been there, done that. Or we hear this lots of times, like, I've done it in a recreational setting, so I know how this goes. It's not it. The intention, the container, the setting, that entire process is so dramatically different that for whatever your concerns are, and I've said this to a couple of people on our sort of intake calls, that, if you were to say that your fear is a 95 out of 100, and you're willing to face it accountably, honestly, and bring your commitment to your best self, which is really what the integration is about. I'll become the best version of myself and bring that to the woman I love, and she'll become the best version of herself and bring that to the man she loves, and together we'll create a relationship that we had no idea was even possible. But if you're scared like 95 out of 100 and you're willing to face it, that your reward for that will be 10 times over. Like that, we keep what we call breaking the scale for how we measure our relationship. Our couples keep breaking the scale for what they thought was possible in terms of intimacy, in terms of connection, in terms of sexual expression, in terms of happiness, in terms of joy. It's like, I really thought if I got from a 6 to an 8, and that's like, I would never go back to an 8 in my, like, we're at 110. Like, we keep breaking the scale, and I think it's directly related to whatever my fear and resistance is. If you can face that, the upside of it will break the scale 10 times over. And we have personal experience and testimony after testimony after testimonial of that being true.
Yeah, it's exponential, not linear.
Yes, and thank you.
That's the best transformation.
Yes.
Is. Right. Yeah.
He's very good at that.
And we were trying, and I guess here's the crazy part to this is, we as human beings aren't wired to understand exponential.
Right.
That's the truth of it, is we are not wired to understand it, which is where the language and the experience and the descriptions never do it service, because it doesn't fit on our curve, which is pretty darn linear. And human beings have trouble with linear. If we get 3 to 5 years out, we can't figure that out, right, let alone exponential in 4 months.
And that's this is a whole different episode, but the articulation of those terrains with psychedelic medicine and how we then weave that back into our everyday life, right? That's so central to the integration process for relationships. It's like, I can actually, that's not just a dream. It actually is something that I can fetch, that I can rewire myself with. And so the language, the question, like even something like nonviolent communication, right? Like, that can actually, I can choose every day to act that way in relationship. And MDMA is often a great teacher about what that actually feels like.
Yes. Yeah. It's a beautiful example.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful example.
Yeah.
Last thoughts about that?
Any final thoughts, Cory? No.
Can I share just one thing that I thought we should bring up, which is, so many women who have gone through this process have had some version of, this is the first time in my life, in my entire life, where I saw myself, my body, as perfect and whole, and I could love it without a single negative thought. And that presence and acceptance, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, sexually, that presence and acceptance opens up pathways to connection, love, and experience that, again, are exponential and break the scale. But I do think that it's a really important component in the work that we do. We hear that over and over and over again. You had very similar experiences that just open the door to aspects of self and connection that previously did not seem possible. Anyway, we hear that all the time.
Yes, we do.
And that's healing in relationship as well, because so much of the insecurity of it is body dysmorphia. It's challenges around eating. So having that and that healing for a woman is super, super powerful. Jay and Cory, this has been an honor. So the connection experience, we'll have links to that in the show notes if folks want to learn more about how they might, if there are any couples who are listening to this, or any people who are in a relationship who are listening to this, who are interested in, please go to the show notes, check that out. Any other assets, resources that you want to point people to before we wrap up today?
I really think that link is great. We have a Facebook page called Love, Sex, and Psychedelics, where we discuss all of these things and share, great podcasts and articles from places like the Third Wave to educate and help people just understand what the implications might be. So if you're interested in joining a community to discover, reinforce, and play, check it. Search us on Facebook as well. Love, Sex, and Psychedelics, in that order.
Cory, any final things from you, or does that wrap it up?
Yeah, no, the Facebook group is great, and maybe the fireside chat link would be good. Okay. We get a lot of the same questions, so we did this video, a fireside chat that just kind of answers all the frequently asked questions in one fell swoop. And I think if anyone's interested, that's basically the place to start. Check that out, and I'm sure your question will get answered in there. And yeah.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much for spending the time. This was beautiful. And I just appreciate both of you for sharing your story, most importantly, and now for also the work that you're doing up in Alberta. It's really been an honor to sit down with you and hear everything.
Yeah. Thank you, Paul.
We appreciate you having us.
Absolutely. That was fun.
Absolutely. It was fun, wasn't it? Hey folks, this conversation is bigger than just you or me, so please leave a review or comment so others can find the podcast. This small action matters way more than you can even imagine. You can also go deeper into this episode at thethirdwave.co/podcast, where you'll find full show notes, transcripts, and all the links that were mentioned in this conversation. To get weekly updates from the leading edge of this third wave of psychedelics, sign up for our newsletter at thethirdwave.co/newsletter. You can also find us on Instagram at Third Wave is Here, or subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/The Third Wave. Thanks so much for watching. If you want to stay up to date on the third wave of psychedelics, subscribe to this channel and visit thethirdwave.co, where you'll find plenty of free resources on intentional and responsible psychedelic use.